what is actually the impact of the live music scene on climate change? I mean, does it make a really big impact, and why is it important that we talk about it today?
Should I jump in there? I mean, I think the reason that we started with festivals 20 years ago was kind of double-edged, I guess. On the one hand, it was a place where you're out of your normal day-to-day situation, so you're open to other ways of doing things. Often it meant that you were out in nature, and if most people grow up in urban environments, so it's that connection. It also takes you away from your light switches and your taps and everything being super convenient, so it makes you realize much more how valuable those are and how fragile they are, actually. And then on the other hand, it's a space where we're creating infrastructure from scratch and a chance to build towns in a different way, which you wouldn't be able to do in a bricks and mortar town because of the scale of investment to try very niche and alternative things. So I think that has a real opportunity. But conversely, by being a town or a city or with touring, the fact that we engage with transport, we generate a lot of waste, we eat a lot of food, that means that we are having an impact, not being the owners of those industries, but being the users of them. And that's where I think, coupled with the fact that we create culture, it's an extremely important place where, whilst we're not the worst polluters, we've got as big, if not bigger, a responsibility to make behaviour changes, essentially.
Great. Ross?
Yeah, just to add on to that, I think with that question, two things come to mind. One is the reality of the emissions of music as a sector, which are relatively low globally. You know, I think there's an amazing piece of research happening at the moment that MIT are leading on, and the rough figures at the moment are like sub 2% of global emissions sit within music, right? So nowhere near what construction or agriculture or, you know, food or travel look like. However, we're talking about a creative industry, and art is the language of emotions. And in these spaces, people have the capacity to feel a certain way about things. And the design and the curation of a space will have an inherent emotional response with the people that attend it. So it might be the case that actually, you know, we all have a job to do, and Claire, it's absolutely a responsibility. It's an opportunity as well. We have this moment in time when we create something to share an ideal with the people that are in that space, and that has a far greater impact than just the reduction in emissions, for example, or the management of the waste, which should be done because it has that ongoing ripple effect with everyone that interacts with it, as well as the duty of care that we have to reduce our impact for all of the reasons that we understand, you know, whether it's environmental or social or otherwise.
Tommy?
Yeah, well, we thought about this, well, actually during COVID, because we had a lot of time to think and discuss, and a lot of people were coming up with all these very cheerful and like rethinking the way we would be living. And when COVID stopped, actually we realized that things came back even faster, rougher, and pushing more gigs and more artists. So we thought about this green issue, this green topic. Like looking at a bit of data, you see that an artist that will take 52 flights in 1 year will have 35 tons of CO2 of carbon emissions, whereas a normal family in Europe has 8 to 10 tons per year. So this is quite high, and all these numbers were quite scary. So we tried to start thinking on how we could have an impact at our level in electronic music in France on this issue. And the other two topics that brought us to this thinking were the work-life balance, like how do you continue what you do, continue to create, but have a better mental health, because when you do 3, 4, 5, 6 gigs in a week, you can't do it very long. And we see that artists have been pushed, a bit like football players, like you have 5 years to do your career, run around, go around the world, and most of them, young artists, say when they are 22 or 25, I won't be able to do this all my life. So we want things to be a bit longer. You have a lot of artists who have 30 years career. We had, just before there was a panel, 20 years of Moby D Records. So where will we be in 20 years? That was one question. And the other question was working with the local scenes and how by reducing travel, reducing carbon impact, we can help grow local scenes, have local artists rise in their country, create artistic circulation with low carbon emission train, for example, in the countries, and then create these exchanges all around Europe, thinking on not having, you know, all these, and there'll always be headliners, and I don't want to be like hitting on the big this or that, but the fact today is that we need to slow down, and the best way to slow down is to value what we have here. It's like when you do short-circuit food, you go buy your food to your local producers, you go buy your music to your local artists, and this is pretty much why we called it court-circuit, short-circuit.
Yeah, that's really nice. Just on the food, is the difference between cooking something from, you know, organic food and buying something that's fast. You know,
exactly.
you know the difference in the health properties. Also, just to tack on to your point about slowing down, I was involved in this diversity and equity like task force that was run by EMA, who are the European Music Managers Association. And you know, the current model and the system that we have disproportionately favors like men or people who identify as males, because there isn't the space for someone who might choose parenthood or might be a carer who are disproportionately female to maintain a career in the industry as it's currently structured, especially in the electronic space, with all the traveling, which is why we have a real problem with females on lineups. You know, it's why there is and transgender people, non-binary people, mothers, you know, carers. You know, it doesn't currently allow for that growth in the current system. So the flattening or the slowing down of that will inherently create a more equitable space for people to operate in.
I know it's kind of segueing from your question,
No,
but
please.
like just to add on the slow touring benefits, it's a way of being ecological, but at the same time as doing it with more gigs rather than less. Mm-hmm. And there's also a problem with the grassroots venues or smaller venues and towns and cities that are mostly towns that are being left behind from accessing different types of nightlife or entertainment and culture. And there's also the issue of taking an entire crew. I mean, we work quite a lot on the arena level of things. And when you take your entire crew on the road and your entire backline and all of the kit, then again, it's that kind of, the people who are able to do that end up in those roles. And if it was within the venues and you had more built within the venues and more staff within the venues, then that's also helping the local population for exactly that reason that you mentioned.
People with access needs as well. You know, that's also a real key element of this. Is like that high level intensity doesn't work for people who have needs like that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's also it brings you out of the connection, because if you think about traveling by train in Europe, it takes more time. I mean, we all came by train, so it's much longer than by plane. But if you cross Europe, if, for example, you go from France to Finland, maybe you'll stop in a city or two, and you'll be able to meet people, connect with smaller clubs, smaller venues, create musical collaborations, and recreate this network that you're like, the human link that's missing today, getting out of the social world, the digital thing, and not taking a selfie at the airport, but speaking with real people. And reconnecting human beings is, I think, also the basic of like creating this kind of alternative scene, because we'll never be able to wipe out the big tours and the big. They exist, they are here, but we see more and more people that think about alternatives and who need to connect, and this human link is super important because we are all responsible of what we do and the emissions that we create. And I think slowing down and going back and looking at things and connecting people and thinking of new alternatives is the key to reducing this CO2 emissions that everybody's like trying to reduce, but no solution at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like getting back to, I guess, the initial question, and which is what was really lovely, is that I guess the ability to mobilize people and like for music, and music to be a space of creativity, a chance to, like you as all artists, like a lot of artists in the room, you have values and you have principles and you have the ability to shape the space that you perform in and shape the culture and have an impact on audiences, and that I guess is very special to people that work in the music industry. Might not be the biggest carbon emitters, but there's a lot of power there.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on the impact as well. I mean, something that Dale Vince, my partner, says is about energy, transport and food being 75% of our emissions. And so if, as an artist or as anybody who's putting on gigs, you understand where the biggest impacts are, then that can help you, like whilst we're talking about changing the structure of the industry, which is something that needs to happen, you can make choices. The most significant, you mentioned flights already, on a personal impact level, that is the biggest. And then food, right? Going plant-based is one of the easiest things that you can do to reduce your emissions. We found with festivals, for example, it was often quoted that it was 80 to 90% travel was the emissions of a festival as a whole. But actually it didn't take into account food, and often food can be up to a third of the impact when you do take that into account, and it can be reduced up to 90% when you take out the meat and dairy. So that's something that's very much within everyone's gift to make that choice as well.
Well, that, I guess, flows on to, I guess, the other question I have. It's like, when we talk about sustainability, what are we talking about? I was quite interested, Ross, you worked on a sustainability rider, and it covered so many different facets beyond just like travel, to do with waste, to do with energy consumption. And as an artist myself, it's like, wow, there are so many different facets to sort of think about, and including like food. So I thought maybe from like each of you could just explain a little bit about what being sustainable means. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, just on that rider, most of it I stole from Claire anyway, the work that AGF
It was open source.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, sustainability to me is a bit of a defunct term, I guess. Okay. It's something that's easy to refer to for maybe people that don't fully understand the complexity of it, but generally when we're talking about sustainability, we're talking about climate action and emissions. But really that ties into, the longevity of anything, which is all pinned to how we can reduce our impact. So I guess one of the pieces of work that we did at Live Green tries to tie all of this together, and maybe I should mention a bit about that. So for anyone that doesn't know, Live is a UK trade body. It came together in COVID to be the unified voice of the live music sector. We speak directly with the government, have a very close relationship with them to make recommendations on how to support the industry. We have 4,000 businesses that we represent, 40,000 artists, 5,000 backstage workers across 15 member organizations, including AFEM. So a real kind of broad spectrum. And within that organization, there's a number of working groups, and Live Green is one of those, and I lead on sustainability and impact for them. So one of the pieces of work that we did was a kind of cross-industry collaboration to kind of take all of these points that we've been discussing and make it easy for artists to implant this level of thinking and the conversation starters into their contracts. So looking at all the key impact areas, food, water, waste, transport, merch as well, and putting that out, taking that from a rider which have existed for a long time, and Claire's been pivotal in ensuring that is proliferated within the industry, but moving it from a rider into a contract, which gives a little bit more weight and kind of vegan meat to the bone. By ensuring that a conversation happens between the artist, the manager, the agent, the promoter, the venue, whoever it is, by saying, as an artist, I want to see these things happen. And it might be the case that, we've had conversations with venues and event operators who are way ahead of where so many artists are. So they might see a rider and they say, well, you as an artist are asking for all of these things, but that actually has a really high impact, and we have an ethos that says we're trying to reduce our impact, so we're doing it this way. And the artist can go, okay, well, I understand that, and there's an education piece there. So the kind of purpose of it was to increase the frequency of conversations that happen in the industry at the point of booking that the artists and the agents and the managers control, and the promoters and the venues can respond to, and to have a feedback loop of education and action kind of through the kind of the mechanism of contracting those shows. And that's all in line with kind of other work that's happened at the National Arenas Association, which Claire has been leading on, and other kind of key stakeholders from the industry to kind of pull that together. And it's been good. I think it's going well, which is nice.
Has it been widely adopted?
Yeah, so we've had a number of agencies. So we worked with the Entertainment Agents Association, who have now had over 30 of their members, so 30 separate independent kind of agencies who have signed up and adopted the clauses. I mean, of note, people that I'm sure in the room would recognise, but ATC have adopted it across all of their management and their live roster. So that's amazing, and Pure Represents as well have put it into all of their contracts. So, that's like Tom Odell and George Ezra and Jamiroquai, and like really significant names. And the larger agents are looking to adopt it, and it's happening on case-by-case basis, where agents and artist teams are implementing them. We haven't quite gotten to a blanket adoption yet, because there's more negotiation that needs to happen between the larger agents and each of the promoters that they work with, because they all have their fixed contracts between each of those parties. Right. So we're trying to kind of work through those like one by one to get it in.
So has it been more complicated the bigger the agent compared to like more independent or smaller boutique agencies in adopting it?
I wouldn't say it's more complicated. It's as simple as it should be for everyone, but there's more lawyers in America for the bigger agencies.
Yeah, but it's like fascinating, because I did read it, and it was like it said that it was all best endeavors, obviously.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Recognizing that everyone is on a different level, or perhaps on their journey into becoming more sustainable. But I suppose it then at least like gives an opportunity, or puts it in your mind to actually think of those different things.
Exactly.
To do with like perhaps things that you wouldn't even really think about.
The intention is that for anyone who doesn't know anything about this, but cares about it, they're simple enough that you could put that in your contract and just start having conversations around each one of those things. It might be that you're asking the venue to have, a plant-based menu. It might be that you're asking them to have batteries if it's a festival. There's things that kind of make it very clear that that's an area that can be discussed. And then you have amazing people like Claire and Tommy who go and do the work. I can sit back and relax.
Sure. Claire, Tommy, what are your views on what does it mean to engage in sustainable practices as a DJ or as a live act? Yeah.
So I actually, it was probably in my late teens that there were a few different factors that influenced me that set me off on this trajectory in the first place. One of them was going to free parties and raves in the woods in the UK, where there were solar-powered sound systems, people were having vegan food, organic, there was composting happening, there was also mushroom chai, so you were innately connected then to the environment, and realised, hang on, we're making quite a mess here, and yet we drink the water and we breathe the air, and it is that kind of, I suppose, complete, intuitive, innate sense of being part of the environment that I first felt when I was like 16, 17. And so that made me realise we have to protect the environment. And that would have been like 20 years ago. So, and then I went to uni to do music industry management, and in the economics class I was told we've got this thing called a carbon footprint, and there's something called sustainable development, and that we were overshooting and causing the warming of the planet. And I thought, how can I be an artist manager or run a record label when this is a problem? So I thought, okay, let's make sustainability a part of my music industry management degree. So I did my dissertation about festivals and the environment. So I was also going into the festivals at that time. And I could see there was a counterculture that was for caring for the planet and for people. And then there was a mainstream industry that was just more about kind of ego, image, and money. And I thought, well, they're much bigger and much stronger and much more influential because they have hundreds of thousands, millions of people engaging. So how can we take a counterculture, hippie, alternative ideal and make it mainstream? So that was where my kind of philosophy of sustainability came from, I suppose. And then over the years, that's been looking at everything from the very practical environmental elements, the things that you can measure as carbon, for instance. So how are we traveling to places? How are we powering? What food are we eating? What is the water system? And how are we making sure that we're keeping that clean? And how are we moving fewer things around, but also creating a space where people are connected in some sense of community, rather than just being consumers. And also, one of my favorite elements is how you don't just not make damage, but how do you enhance and make things better? So if we're going into a space, or if we're spending our time while we're alive putting energy into something, or if we're creating a festival or have a brand or whatever it might be, how are we making things more alive and more better rather than depleting them? So that, for me, I guess, is what sustainability encapsulates. But there's lots of different projects. Yeah. Do you want me to talk about any of the projects, or shall I stop for a second?
Perhaps, yeah. Well, I'll get to, perhaps Tommy, you can explain a little bit about what your views are on, I guess, what are we talking about when we're talking about sustainable practices from your point of view?
Well, what we've thought about, well, for us, sustainability, of course, is reducing carbon footprint and having another view of how we do our jobs today. But it's also longevity of a career of a person, because, as I said before, people are being rushed in their career, in their gigs, so it's a very fast life that came up with EasyJet, the EasyJet generation, and all these things, social media. So for us, it was really like slow down, and also prove that it's possible, because there were a lot of discussions in the past years around, yeah, we should do green touring, we should take the train, but everybody was, yeah, but it's super expensive, we can't do it. So what pushed us to go get the financing is to incentivize the tours and to pay the additional money to for example, additional hotel nights in the cities or things like that, to show it's possible and to show what can be done around this, the reconnection, what do you do when you have time, actually, because they want us to believe that we don't have time, that we're going to die tomorrow, that if we don't get enough followers, we're finished, and all this is just getting stupid. And so we just wanted to say, okay, if we slow things down, what can we do, and how do we change this perception of the society we live in, of the artistic environment that we evolve in, and since money is always in the middle of the discussions, what we proposed when we went to look for these financings is that we're going to incentivize for additional hotel nights, for train travels and things like that. Show it's possible, create content, but cool content, like I'm in the train, what am I doing? I'm creating a track, I'm speaking with my friend, I'm having a good sleep in my comfortable train seat rather than my shitty EasyJet seat. And really this is just changing the view, because I think we can't minimize the impact of the tools, the social media tools. It's just how do we use them? And we think that using them we work with DJs for Climate Action also, and a few organizations, Music Declares Emergency. And the idea is really to create all these toolkits, all these proofs of concepts that it's possible to do, and that you won't just be bored sitting in a train, or you won't just be bored sitting in your hotel room, because as I said, also it affects your mental health, because isolation creates this kind of trauma, and when you get back home, like you spend 3 days alone in a hotel room because you play a gig for 1 hour and a half, and most of the time you're alone in your in the hotel room, you're alone all the time. So we want to reconnect, and we want to show that another way of viewing things is possible, and of course incentivizing is, and it's cool, because since when we said we're going to pay, a lot of people were interested, and so we do talk with managers, we do talk with bookers, we do talk with clubs. We have 2 tours that are planned next year in 2026. it's a 3-year program, and we hope that it's going to grow and work with our friends to do even more and make it happen, because as a lot of topics, it's very cool to talk about it, but I think as well as a lot of other topics that are in these conferences, now you have to act, and for that you need the money, so that's why we went to look for financing, and the objective is to create a bigger European network, go get more European financing, get more money, and bring more people to work on these projects.
I think proof of concept is so important, because I think a lot of it's like why you wouldn't, the economics don't add up, or there's always sort of like these barriers, or the infrastructure isn't there. And I know that you all work like on this to demonstrate of what is sort of possible and why it could be even better. So perhaps, yeah, like Claire, like I know that you were recently involved in a pretty big collaboration with Massive Attack alongside many of your other projects. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so Massive Attack have been really outspoken and really great advocates for, they probably wouldn't call it sustainability, but preventing climate change, protecting the environment, and also on a lot of social issues as well. They're very vocal about Gaza, and they pull no punches in the things that they do. And about 5 years ago, they collaborated with the Tyndall Centre for Climate Change Research and produced a super low carbon gig roadmap. And then it took a number of years because of the pandemic, and then they cancelled a gig in Liverpool because they found out the place was hosting an arms fair beforehand. So it took years to happen. But eventually they were able to create kind of a manifestation of what is this super low carbon gig. And then Ecotricity sponsored the event, and they're the green energy supplier in the UK, and also have a great ethos about veganism. And so it was a really unique situation where the headline artist and the headline sponsor had the same ethos as we do as a greener future, and so it pulled out all of the stops. And on this gig, which happened in Bristol, it was really, really inspiring and exciting, because whilst every individual piece perhaps had been done in some form before, this was the first time that everyone that had the influence and control over what happens was pushing in the same direction. So there was 100% renewable energy, and it was on battery because there were no grid. There were no grid connections on site. We had our 1 megawatt Grid Fairies battery powering the main stage with no kind of diesel backup or grid backup, which was a first. It was the largest battery that had been used on an event site, and the first time it had been used without any backup as well. So I personally was a bit like, oh, please don't do an encore and turn off all the white lights. But actually at the end of it, it still had 50% left in the battery. The rest of the batteries around site were being topped up with an electric truck going around with batteries on the back, and they were delivered to site using electric trucks and CNG, compressed natural gas trucks, so the emissions were reduced there. Just to say a bit more on that with the power part of it, it meant that about 5 different companies or groups were coming together, from the distribution people who were like laying the cables, people who are real naysayers, like this isn't going to work, what are you doing, through to like us as Grid Fairies providing the big shiny battery for the main stage. And it ended up being really exciting. There was like a wizard's cabin, as we call it, where you could monitor all of the battery power going up and down and the recharging cycles. And that felt like change, like progress, like we're actually getting out of like business as usual. The other things that happened were the train company laid on extra trains, and then the artists, Massive Attack, who were headlining, agreed to finish 15 minutes earlier so that people could make it to those trains based upon where most people were buying the tickets. And there were 39 electric buses to get people back and forth to and from the train station. And then the food, that was one that it always gets the biggest pushback. But we ended up having 100% vegan, plant-based food for the audience, the crew, and the artists, which saved about 90% of emissions off the food bill. The food carbon bill. And it was hugely popular. Actually, the queues were too big. We could have had more vegan caterers there. But it was the one that got the most pushback from the promoters beforehand. But luckily, because everybody was behind it, it got through. And we need to see that happening more. The other thing that they had with that gig was the platform for social justice as well, because that goes hand in hand. It's not just the environmental elements, but there was a purpose behind the event happening that was more than just the entertainment, which is purpose in itself, amazing, incredible music. But it ended up also getting a world record for the lowest carbon gig, which I thought was quite amusing. I thought they were just over-egging it in the news, but they actually got it from the Guinness World Book of Records. So that was,
That's so exciting to hear. And what I also love is that I guess they're really looking after the audience as well, like thinking about how they're going to get back safely and thinking about the traffic and making it, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's really important because if you're going to say, basically framed it as an experiment. So it's that Act 1.5 Climate Action Accelerator, which has gone on to create the Yuen Accelerator City with the UN. They're now working with C40 and Billie Eilish, and it's a great force for good in the industry. But if you're going to say this is what the future looks like and this is what a green gig is, it has to be better. Like, it can't be worse. So, like, maybe it can be as good, but ideally it needs to be better because you're showing the direction of travel.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the thing. Yeah, it doesn't necessarily, it shouldn't be a poorer version just to achieve it. It can be a lot better. And when you think about, like, going somewhere rural, you're there to enjoy and experience the nature, it seems quite, like, there's a dissonance if you're going to go there and just pollute or leave a lot of waste or not be able to, or be, and breathe in, like, the air with, like, diesel and stuff. So, but I also love as well that there's a lot of overlap, like, with, you know, how do you look after the mental health of artists? How do you look after the audience and their sort of safety? Because those are also really integral when we're talking about how do you create a sustainable, better music ecosystem where artists and audience can thrive. So, yeah.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I think what all of this action and these projects kind of tell me, and from my wearing my old manager hat on, who, you know, as a person who is passionate about this, it says that the industry is moving, the industry is progressing, and I remember having endless conversations with my artist clients. And trying to pick through, like, how do we do this? Like, where's my value? Like, how can I be impactful? And finding that actually the things that we want to a certain level, you know, when you're below a certain profile, it's actually really hard to push through these demands. You know, if you're not a Massive Attack and you're not a headliner and you care about it, it's really difficult to know how you can go on and be impactful in a environment that doesn't feel like it wants to do the same thing. But what we have now is an industry that is saying, we are committed to making this change and we're inviting more people to be part of that. And we're seeing it every day. And there's a growing number list of projects that you can point to and go, that's cool, I want to be part of that. Or I had this idea and now I know it's going to be possible. So I guess for people in the room, this is a signal, and it's the invitation to say, like, the opportunities are there now. You can have your say. And actually, you know, in the current climate with things that are happening, that say might be, I'm choosing to boycott an event because I don't agree with how their morals align. It's not where I want to be. And you can remove your label, or you can go and do the show and you can put up a big flag of a country that you want to align with and say, that's my mark of solidarity. You know, these opportunities are there and the examples are there. And I think that's a really exciting time. This is a new energy in the industry. It's a new energy in the creative sector. And we're in a new time for the world. And every artist has a role to play in that. And every individual, every person has an opportunity to make their mark and to have a say. And that to me feels really exciting. And it feels more collaborative than it ever has done. And, you know, you guys have been doing this for a long time as well. But that's how I feel.
I totally agree, and actually we were quite surprised to see that the industry was responding quite positively. On the other hand, what we see, and I think that's where we need to put a bit more energy, is the governmental lobby. Because when it comes to governmental decisions, we see a lot of festivals in France that are willing to use more train transportation, for example. But the people that are not accepting that are the unions and the local governments, because trains have their specific times, so you can't add a train. So a festival that will finish at 2 o'clock in the morning, they need the trains to run until 2:30, but they won't accept because it creates I don't know, disorganization for the people working or something like that. So I think that we were quite surprised actually, because we thought industry would not embrace all these initiatives. But I think where we should still keep on fighting and pushing is with the governmental policies. And mostly in the past 6, 8 to 10 months, we saw a lot of countries following a big recent country with a recent elected president that totally forgot about our planet. And we're seeing this, and I think this is a real threat. And we need to really push and do a lot of lobby with the local governments and with the governments, because they are also a key to bringing up the solution. And I think this is, by working all together at a European level, will definitely help unlock a few issues that enable us to implement this green and sustainable policy.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think that we should never underestimate how much culture influences government decisions as well, because they want to be the most popular ones and get the votes. But that also raises the issue that there is this polarization now. And a couple of things from working, I suppose, in this sphere for a couple of decades, it used to be that it was just nice that anyone was interested, and the main obstacle was ignorance and disengagement. Whereas now there's an active opposition to the things that our ideologies, I guess, and wanting to look after things. And so that needs to be countered quite strongly through the actions that we take. And that we have seen great progress. We've also seen where the ceiling is. So we've gone as far as we can in the system that we exist in. So we've gone as far as we can as far as making a super green festival within the country or the world that we're already operating in. And then there comes a point that the bigger industries and legislation policies need to change.
Yeah.
But those conversations are happening now. Like I mentioned, there was the Yuen Accelerator City connecting with C40. We had a change of government last year in the UK, which is more engaged. There's positive results from some of the extreme right wing making sensible people rise up.
I think,
Exactly.
I think from this sort of conversation, I'm so inspired and actually quite optimistic. I really wasn't sure, because there's a lot of things that are going on in the world, and you think, oh, are we going backwards? But actually, there's, as you said, there's opportunity for change. All of you in the room have all this power and ability to be creative and to push back and to live in accordance with your values. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, and I wanted to check if anyone in the audience wanted to share anything or had any questions for our panelists. Would love to hear from you. Does anyone have anything to say? Oh, great. There's a question or a comment there. Oh, no. Take mine. Do you want to take mine? Yeah. You can take mine. Is it working? No. Yeah.
Can you hear me if I speak? Okay. Thank you. No, just wanted to ask, as an artist, do you have any tools you would recommend to, when you check a festival, to see if that festival is because there are often things that are kind of behind the curtains, but yeah, do you have tips for that?
Oh, I mean, specifically, and I think I know what you're getting at, that's a very complex answer to a very complex question. And if we're talking about ownership and IP and, it's festivals specifically, shouldn't I play a festival? It's very difficult to know unless it's in the public domain. And then, I don't know. We've been talking about providing resource to answer that and to support people in making those decisions, but I think it's going to be, for now, based on what you can find and how you feel about it. Specifically for sustainability, if you're looking for tools, I mean, there's a toolkit that Tom has created. AGF have a whole resource hub on their website, as do Live Green. So if you go livemusic.biz and go to the Live Green section, there's an infinite amount of resources, and we've tried to condense it down and curate it so it's not overwhelming, but there should be something for everyone to find. And I'm happy to kind of signpost to stuff if anyone wants to find me after.
Yeah, I think specific artist ones that I could point you to would be on the resources section on the Greener Future website is the tour flight check, the production rider, and there's a green artist rider as well, and they'd probably be the most applicable for linking between promoters and artists on our resources.
Thank you.
Just to add another thought that I had when you were speaking earlier about one of the things that I feel bad about sometimes when I see it is young people coming into the industry and being taught bad habits because they're looking to the dinosaurs that are still in charge and learning how to do things badly. And I think actually it really needs to change. So there are great examples, like you were saying, like using the cases to show that things can be done differently without getting caught up into this machine that turns an artist's career basically into more emissions, which is what's currently happening. So don't feel like you need to follow the path of what's gone before, because it ain't working. We need to change it.
Great. Do you two have any lasting thoughts before we wind things up for today?
Just to reiterate, you know, the value and the power that you have as an individual, and layering on, you know, artistic and creative freedom into that becomes a really potent mix of, you know, a powerful individual. You know, we all have the capacity to trust our gut, like question things and challenge things that we don't agree with, but when you turn that into art, it takes on a form bigger than yourself. And I think we've never needed that more, and it's never been more prevalent, and we're seeing it more and more with, you know, artists like Kneecap or Massive Attack or Billie Eilish taking these stances, and, you know, loads of artists in the electronic music space, and you can all kind of have a part in having a message that kind of counts for something. And yeah, I would just encourage people to do it and not be afraid.
Yeah, I would say that if you think about your career, think about it on the 360 degrees, like where you want to be, not in 6 months, but in 10 years. And think about longevity on a career. Look at all the artists that have been here for many years, and don't just get sucked in this kind of fast and rush and pressure process. Think about your work-life balance. Think about what are your commitments for the society, for the community, for the planet, and think that in 20 or 30 years, you'll still be an artist, you'll still be contributing to your ecosystem. I've been here for 30 plus years, and I've been doing a lot of things, and I think it's not just the music today, it's the role as an artist in the society and where you want to place yourself and what are the choices that you're going to be making now, but also in years that will impact how the ecosystem will transform, evolve, and stay alive.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ross, Tommy, Claire. Thank you all for joining us today, and thank you to Berlin Dance Music Event.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
thank AFEM as well. Thank you so much.